It's May 5th, 2024, and I'm with John J. Jekovich, World War II veteran, and we're reading his book, Their Mother's Son, and I'm on page 345, Passwords, Kia, and Hospital Bound. What was your dog tag number?
Say again?
What was your dog tag number? Your number. Your dog tag.
4209295.
Could you repeat that?
4209295.
Okay, we're ready to go. I was taken, this is when John Jekovich got shot. I was taken to the x-ray room where my shoulder and leg were x-rayed. I was told the shoulder wound was not serious. The bullet has been spent as the nurse at the forward station suggested. There was some loss of muscle tissue, and most serious aspect of it was shattering some nerve endings along the shoulder. This would explain the numbness I was experiencing in my arm. They would attend to this when I received the evacuation from the hospital. Do you still have some numbness in your arm?
Huh?
Do you still have some numbness in your arm?
Well, yeah.
I mean, considering how the
I can use it.
How bad was the numbness when you got shot 80 years ago?
Well, you get shot, you destroy all the nerves around there. There's going to be a certain reaction.
So, are you pretty much your arm has been very functional for the last 75 years? Would you say?
They take care of everybody.
So you're fine.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let me continue reading. This would experience the numbness I was experiencing in my arm. They would attend to this, and I reached the evacuation hospital. My leg wound was another matter, a bit more serious, but not life-threatening in any way. I had lost considerable amount of muscle tissue, which I would never recover, but most serious aspect was the remaining shrapnel, which had penetrated deeply into the cavity of the leg. They would evaluate it further at the evac hospital and make a final determination regarding its disposition. 80 years later, Mr. Jekovich, you used to have shrapnel in your leg, shrapnel in your leg.
They didn't want to get it out.
How much did they get out?
Probably 90%.
And how big of a piece you think you got in your leg right now?
Probably this big right here.
That's it? How about when you go into an airport and they put a metal detector on you? What happens?
The buzzer goes off.
I see. Do you have some documents?
I have a card that says this. Excuse the inconvenience. This gentleman has two shrapnel in his leg. Or
so you had to carry that letter with you.
Yeah.
Okay. How has that affected your leg function? Being that you did jog for 80 years, how did it?
I ran for 80 years after that.
So you're in good shape now?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Considering I'm 98 years old.
Gonna be 99.
Huh?
Gonna be 99.
You are.
Huh?
You're a mighty fine, functioning gentleman for 99 years. That's
Thank you, Claire.
hard to believe.
Thank you, Claire. That's a nice compliment.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call him a pain in the neck. He's a gentleman, isn't he?
He's a gentleman.
Claire called you a gentleman. That was a very nice compliment.
Oh.
Claire,
Oh,
she just
yeah.
called you a gentleman.
Yeah.
Well, he's a pleasure to work with.
It's a pleasure to work with, is right. I agree with you, Claire. I really agree with you. Thank you. But you took the words out of my mouth. They returned me to the cot, and I pondered all that the American doctors had told me. I did not think he was seriously wounded, and I hoped that they would not start probing me again. A tall brunette nurse began giving me penicillin injections every 4 hours, which was the beginning of an endless ritual for almost the time I was hospitalized. She smiled good-naturedly as she swabbed my arm with alcohol in preparation for the injection. She stated she made notations on my chart, which would be transferred to the evacuation hospital in Dentist shortly, and then I would be on my way to Paris, France. That evening, a coachman brought me a steak, fried potatoes, Brussels sprouts, coffee, and an apple pie. I ate them greatly, juggling the overladen tray on my lap. I tried to sit up on my cot, but I could not finish the entire meal, and I was not used to having that much food at one sitting. I did not realize how little food we had consumed while in combat. What was more, we did not miss it or have any type of hunger pains as a result of it. So now you're bringing a normal-sized meal in the hospital, and now you're thinking back when you're on the enemy's lines, you barely ate. And when you're barely eating at that time, you didn't realize that you had very little food, but you didn't miss it back then.
No.
You didn't miss it.
No. Well, I didn't have it. I didn't have it.
Yeah. And so when they give you a nice-sized meal, it was a normal-sized meal, it was too much for you to take in.
Yeah.
And did you have Brussels sprouts before this?
But,
This is the first time you had Brussels sprouts?
yeah.
Did you enjoy them?
Say what?
Brussels sprouts.
Yeah.
You didn't have them in the States, did
I had
you?
it in England first time.
And did you enjoy the Brussels sprouts?
Remember that guy went to the stockade, he says, don't feed them, don't feed them.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
kill them.
Yeah, that was the prisoners of war. They were completely,
Those are prisoners of war.
yeah. Okay.
Don't feed them, don't feed them.
Later I lay on my cot, which most of the lights out in the ward. I thought about Lape and promised Fink that I would make to each other. I felt responsible and recalled what Lape had said about moving back on a mortar fire, and I had declined. I should have listened to what he said. In reality, we were not too much help in keeping the Germans from overrunning our position. What was Lape's first name?
Donald.
Donald Lape. And what city was Donald Lape from?
Albany,
Albany, New York. Donald Lape, God rest his soul. And
Most of his parents were school teachers.
yeah. And what was Fink's first name?
Who?
Fink.
Fink?
Yeah, what was his first name?
It wasn't Robert. Donald Fink, I think it was.
Where was he from?
Probably from Western New York.
Was he a much more experienced soldier than Lape?
Well, yes, he had more street smarts. Lape didn't have those. He come from a good family.
Lape had no street smarts at all.
No, everything's handed to him.
Oh.
This other guy had to work for it. He had to get a job when he was 14 years old.
Okay. Okay. I thought of Fink, the suddenness of his death, and how I could better more help and relieve some of the load of responsibility from him. Also, Lester and I relied on him so much and took so much for granted regarding his ability and resourcefulness. Then there was Ellis, Huber, Grayton, and Sullivan. How much I had contributed directly to their deaths? ? I knew they had met deaths under combat conditions, but I still felt I did not keep them from harm's way. In a word, I felt guilty. Here I was getting the best treatment, both medically and psychologically, being treated like a hero, while most of my comrades were still lying in the snow, frozen, unknown to anyone. Their bodies would not be recovered until the deep snow melted sometime in the spring. It brought back pains and remorse when I identified my father's body at the morgue in the hospital. More so when my mother blamed me directly for his death. I felt the same way now, perturbed and penitent. My physical injuries were not as painful as my mental anguish I felt and perceived. It was warm in the room, warmer than I had been for a long time, and I thought of the riflemen pinned down in the cold and the snow. I wondered what happened to the new replacements and if they had survived the first 24 hours of combat. I could still recall their faces, but was at a loss to remember their names. much less their individual personalities. A couple of husky orderlies came to my cot and said jokingly that I was going to go for another ride. They strapped me into a wheelchair, bundled me up with blankets, and carried me into a waiting ambulance. They were there with 3 other wounded soldiers in the ambulance, along with a medic and a nurse. The ambulance was warm inside, and the motion of the vehicle soon put me to sleep. I was eventually awakened by several orderlies carrying me from the ambulance. I was at the evacuation hospital in Florence. Here my dressings were removed, and I brought to an operating room on the 2nd floor. I was told by an Army surgeon that they would attempt to free up the pinched nerve in my shoulder, which was causing the numbness in my arm and hand. They also wanted to see if they could remove the deep embedded piece of shrapnel in my leg. I was giving a local anesthetic, and I could hear the medical officers cutting away tissues in my arm. So what you basically had was simply a local anesthetic,
Yeah.
but you were wide awake, and you could hear the scalpels and the scissors
Yeah.
cutting on your flesh.
Yeah, snippet it.
Do you remember that quite closely
Yeah.
and clearly? I was given another local this time in my upper leg. I heard nothing, but I felt the sharp pangs of pain, and I jerked the leg upward. I felt someone lay his hand on my leg as they started to probe it once again. Each time I felt a sharp jab. I would tighten my leg even though it was being held down. A short while later, my shoulder and leg were rebandaged, and I was brought back to my cot. I could quickly fall asleep and slept for a while until I was awakened by a nurse giving me another injection. She said that I would be moving to the field hospital from here. I would await a hospital train to the rear. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast of steak and eggs, I was transported by ambulance to a field hospital near Beaumont. Her dressings were changed again, and the usual penicillin injection was given, and I was asked by an Army doctor about the numbness in my arm and hand. As far as I was concerned, it was the same. The Army medic did not seem surprised, but said nothing. I spent the day and part of that night in a field hospital, waiting primarily for a full train complement of wounded to make its journey to Paris. Nothing was done there, no further probing, operations, or x-rays. Just a routine penicillin injection every 4 hours and a dressing changed several times. I had no complaints. The food was great, and we were in a comfortable, warm ward, and even had the USO show that afternoon. At 300 hours, we were loaded into a hospital train, and shortly thereafter, we were on our way to Paris. A brunette nurse in the Army green coveralls came by to administer the penicillin and informed us we were on our way to Paris and should arrive there in about 24 hours. When you're on that train going to Paris, was that strictly a hospital train where there was just stretchers throughout, or was there seats?
It was a converted luxury train that made it a hospital train.
Stretchers.
Bunks 3 high.
So everyone was on a stretcher?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. The rumble and motion of the train reminded me of the train back ride to Owensboro from Furlough. The nurse, sometimes accompanied by a doctor, came through every 4 hours to give us our shots, not even waiting until we were fully awake. As the train rumbled through the small towns and villages, its screeching whistle signaling its coming to the crossing at the end of the road, I thought of Lape and how many times I had ignored him, but I felt I had, as I thought of those many times, but the thought of his death made it even more apprehensive. I could picture how his parents would react to the news, as they were very close to him. I then thought how my mother would take the telegram of my being wounded. She probably got it several days ago. I then thought of Ann and Jean, of the fact that they would never know whatever happened to me. It was just like Fink and his girlfriend at Haverford West. She would never know what became of him. I had not written to either Ann or Jean since arriving in France. Somehow, during the last few weeks, I come to the decision that I never would. It came as no surprise to me, my desire not to write. It seemed that it was the only answer to the dilemma I had been wrestling with these past months. I was depressed at the thought of losing Lape. On top of everything else, Fink, Lester Ellis, and all the rest of them were still on my mind. I again thought of the young new replacements on how quickly their lives were snuffed out. I thought of the replacements in my squad and wondered whatever happened to them. My thoughts went out to the riflemen pinned down in the open field with no relief in sight, suffering the extreme cold and a thought of dying. The motion of the train ultimately put me into sleep, but I was disturbed sleep and interrupted by penicillin injections and visions of Lape lying there with his glasses dangling from his only ear. The 24 hours on the hospital train went rather quickly. What the 3 meals during the day, shots, temperature taking, thinking about the past, and strange enough the future time moved swiftly, much more swiftly than we can comprehend. None of the other wounded talked very much, hence no one got greatly acquainted with anyone else. No one was in much of a mood for conversation. Each had his own mind to unravel and come to terms with. Each carried a heavy burden, namely, why me? Why was I spared and someone better than I was taken away? Some of us would live with the enigma the rest of our lives. The next night, a little after 2,400 hours, French civilians assisted the ambulance crews in unloading the hospital train at the Paris station. Medical staff people would look at our diagnostics tags and stamp a letter on it for the various hospitals in the Paris area. While we waited for our ambulance, ladies in the Red Cross uniforms would pass out coffee and donuts. This was all so strange to most of us, having been isolated from the normal world for a time, where nothing was ever taken for granted. One could not adjust that quickly to this strange new life. Okay, that was the conclusion of chapter 12. And now we're going to start with chapter 13 on page 349. And the heading of that chapter is Renee, Tripe, and Antampes. Renee, Tripe, and Antampes.
Were the donuts good, John?
Huh?
Were the donuts good at the USO Donuts? Were the donuts good? You said you had donuts they handed out donuts to you.
By the Red Cross.
Oh, yeah. They were stale.
They were stale. Oh, Lord help me. Okay, is it still recording?